Question 1. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of risk assessment. Which of the following approaches best reflects the necessary due diligence and legal compliance for such an assessment? Option A. Prioritizing the acquisition of the firearm over a detailed assessment of personal risk factors, believing that legal ownership inherently implies responsible carrying. Option B. Relying on informal assurances from friends and family that the applicant is a responsible individual without a structured personal evaluation against legal criteria. Option C. Focusing primarily on demonstrating proficiency in basic firearm handling and marksmanship, assuming a clean criminal record negates the need for further personal risk assessment. Option D. Conducting a thorough self-evaluation of personal temperament, history of violence or substance abuse, and any mental health concerns, coupled with a commitment to ongoing training and safe storage practices. The correct answer is D. Conducting a thorough self-evaluation of personal temperament, history of violence or substance abuse, and any mental health concerns, coupled with a commitment to ongoing training and safe storage practices. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the risk assessment process as it pertains to firearm ownership and the legal requirements for obtaining a permit to carry in Connecticut. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a superficial understanding of safety and a comprehensive, legally compliant risk assessment that considers all relevant factors. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the applicant's approach aligns with the spirit and letter of Connecticut law, which prioritizes public safety while respecting individual rights. The best approach involves a systematic evaluation of potential risks associated with firearm ownership and carrying, directly addressing the criteria outlined in Connecticut general statutes. This includes a self-assessment of an applicant's temperament, history of violence or substance abuse, and any mental health concerns that could impact responsible firearm handling. Furthermore, it necessitates a commitment to ongoing training and adherence to safe storage practices. This approach is correct because it directly reflects the due diligence expected of any applicant seeking to carry a pistol or revolver, as implicitly required by the state's permitting process, which aims to ensure that only responsible individuals are granted such privileges. It aligns with the ethical obligation to prevent harm to oneself and others. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on basic firearm handling proficiency, without considering broader personal risk factors. This fails to meet the comprehensive risk assessment standard, as it overlooks potential behavioral or psychological issues that could render an individual a danger to themselves or the public, even if they are technically proficient with a firearm. This approach is ethically and regulatorily deficient because it does not adequately address the state's interest in preventing firearm misuse by individuals who may pose an elevated risk. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that a clean criminal record automatically negates any need for personal risk assessment. While a criminal record is a significant factor, it is not the sole determinant of an individual's suitability to carry a firearm. This approach is flawed because it ignores the possibility of undisclosed issues, such as documented instances of domestic disputes, documented mental health crises, or patterns of aggressive behavior that may not have resulted in a criminal conviction, but still indicate a heightened risk. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of others regarding one's suitability, without a structured self-evaluation against legal and ethical standards, is also incorrect. This is professionally unacceptable as it lacks objectivity and a basis in established legal requirements. It fails to demonstrate the applicant's personal commitment to understanding and mitigating potential risks, which is a fundamental aspect of responsible firearm ownership and carrying. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the specific legal requirements of Connecticut general statutes concerning pistol permits. This framework should then involve a structured self-assessment, considering all aspects of personal history, mental and emotional well-being, and a commitment to ongoing training and safe practices. The process should be objective, honest, and directly address the state's interest in public safety. Question 2. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must undergo a risk assessment as part of the application process. Which of the following best represents a responsible and legally compliant approach to this risk assessment? Option A. minimizing or omitting any personal history that might be perceived as unfavorable, even if it is not explicitly listed as a disqualifying factor in Connecticut law, with the belief that it is not relevant to the permit. Option B, conducting a thorough self-evaluation of personal history, mental and emotional stability, and understanding of all applicable Connecticut laws regarding firearm possession and carry, and proactively addressing any potential concerns with honesty and completeness. Option C, relying on a general understanding of firearm safety rules, without researching the specific legal disqualifiers and requirements outlined in Connecticut general statutes for permit applicants. Option D, focusing exclusively on demonstrating proficiency in firearm handling and marksmanship, assuming that mechanical skill negates the need for extensive personal risk assessment. The correct answer is B, conducting a thorough self-evaluation of personal history, mental and emotional stability, and understanding of all applicable Connecticut laws regarding firearm possession and carry, and proactively addressing any potential concerns with honesty and completeness. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of firearm safety and legal requirements, but also the ability to accurately assess and articulate potential risks associated with firearm ownership and carry. The Connecticut permit application process, as governed by Connecticut General Statutes, CGS, Section 29-28, and related regulation, emphasizes responsible gun ownership and the prevention of firearms falling into the wrong hands. A thorough risk assessment is crucial for both the applicant and the issuing authority to ensure public safety. The best approach involves a comprehensive self-assessment of personal circumstances and a proactive understanding of legal obligations. This includes honestly evaluating one's mental and emotional stability, history of violence or substance abuse, and any factors that might compromise safe firearm handling or storage. It also necessitates a clear understanding of Connecticut's specific laws regarding permit eligibility, prohibited person, and safe storage requirements. By thoroughly addressing these aspects, the applicant demonstrates a mature and responsible attitude towards firearm ownership, aligning with the intent of the permitting process to ensure only qualified individuals are granted permits. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit any personal history that might be perceived negatively, even if it does not legally disqualify the applicant. Connecticut law requires applicants to provide truthful and complete information. Concealing or misrepresenting information, even if the applicant believes it is not a direct disqualifier, can lead to permit denial or revocation and undermines the integrity of the application process. Failure to be transparent violates the ethical obligation of honesty and potentially the legal requirement for full disclosure. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the mechanical aspects of firearm operation and ignore the broader legal and personal responsibility aspects. While proficiency with a firearm is important, the Connecticut permit process is fundamentally about assessing the applicant's suitability and risk profile. Overlooking the legal framework and personal risk factors demonstrates a superficial understanding of what it means to be a responsible permit holder. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that past minor infractions, if not explicitly listed as disqualifiers, are irrelevant. Connecticut law outlines various grounds for disqualification, and a thorough understanding of these is essential. Failing to consider how past behavior might be interpreted in the context of firearm ownership and carry, or failing to research the full scope of disqualifying factors, shows a lack of due diligence and a potential misunderstanding of the seriousness of the permit application. Professionals should approach this by first thoroughly reviewing the Connecticut general statutes pertaining to pistol permits, particularly CGS Section 29-28 and any associated administrative regulations. They should then conduct a candid self-assessment of their personal history, mental and emotional state, and any potential risk factors. This self-assessment should be followed by a clear understanding of how these factors might intersect with legal eligibility requirements. If any concerns arise, seeking clarification from the issuing authority or legal counsel is advisable before submitting the application. Question 3. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver is undergoing a risk assessment. Which of the following best describes the applicant's responsibility in this process? Option A, to demonstrate proficiency in basic firearm handling and marksmanship, as this is the primary indicator of responsible gun ownership. Option B, to conduct a thorough self-evaluation of personal circumstances, including mental and physical health, any history of anger management issues or substance abuse, and a commitment to secure firearm storage to ensure they meet all legal requirements for permit issuance. Option C, to provide evidence of a clean criminal record, as this is the sole determinant of eligibility for a pistol permit. Option D, to simply state their intention to own a firearm for self-defense purposes, as this inherently signifies their suitability. The correct answer is B, to conduct a thorough self-evaluation of personal circumstances, including mental and physical health, any history of anger management issues or substance abuse, and a commitment to secure firearm storage to ensure they meet all legal requirements for permit issuance. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the risk assessment process as it applies to firearm ownership and the legal requirements for obtaining a permit to carry in Connecticut. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a superficial understanding of safety and a comprehensive, legally compliant risk assessment that considers all relevant factors. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the applicant's self-assessment aligns with the standards set by Connecticut law, which prioritizes public safety while respecting individual rights. The best approach involves a comprehensive self-evaluation of personal circumstances, mental and physical health, and any history that might indicate a risk to oneself or others. This includes honestly assessing any past instances of anger, impulsivity, or substance abuse, and considering the secure storage of firearms. This approach is correct because Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28 and Section 29-36F mandate that an applicant for a pistol or revolver permit must demonstrate that they are not disqualified by reason of mental health issues, criminal history, or other factors that would make them a danger to themselves or others. A thorough self-assessment directly addresses these statutory requirements by proactively identifying potential disqualifiers and demonstrating a commitment to responsible gun ownership. It also aligns with the ethical imperative to ensure that firearm possession does not pose an undue risk to the community. An approach that focuses solely on basic firearm handling proficiency without considering personal suitability or the potential for misuse is incorrect. This fails to meet the statutory requirement of assessing an applicant's overall fitness and risk profile. It overlooks the critical aspect of responsible ownership, which extends beyond technical skill to include mental and emotional stability and a commitment to safe storage. An approach that relies on the assumption that a clean criminal record is sufficient without addressing potential mental health concerns or personal behavioral patterns is also incorrect. Connecticut law explicitly considers mental health and other factors that might indicate a propensity for violence or irresponsibility, even in the absence of a criminal conviction. Finally, an approach that prioritizes convenience or speed over thoroughness, such as simply stating a desire to own a firearm for self-defense without detailing a comprehensive risk assessment, is professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the gravity of firearm ownership and the legal responsibilities involved. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing statutes and regulations. This involves identifying all criteria for permit issuance and disqualification. The next step is to conduct a self-assessment that directly addresses each of these criteria, honestly evaluating personal history, mental and physical well-being, and commitment to safe practices. This proactive self-evaluation ensures that the applicant can confidently attest to meeting all legal requirements and demonstrates a responsible approach to firearm ownership. Question 4. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver is being evaluated not only on their knowledge of firearm mechanics and basic safety, but also on their understanding of proactive risk assessment. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates this understanding of risk assessment in the context of responsible firearm ownership? Option A. Demonstrating proficiency in the basic firearm safety rules taught in the mandatory permit course, such as keeping the firearm pointed in a safe direction and keeping a finger off the trigger until ready to fire. Option B. Storing the firearm in a convenient location for immediate access in case of a perceived threat, with minimal emphasis on additional security measures. Option C. Implementing a multifaceted safety plan that includes secure, locked storage of the firearm when not in use, strict adherence to safe handling rules at all times, and maintaining awareness of household members' access and potential risks. Option D. Focusing primarily on the legal requirements for obtaining and renewing the permit, ensuring all paperwork is filed correctly and on time. The correct answer is C. Implementing a multifaceted safety plan that includes secure, locked storage of the firearm when not in use, strict adherence to safe handling rules at all times, and maintaining awareness of household members' access and potential risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment principles as they apply to firearm ownership and responsible handling, beyond mere technical proficiency. The challenge lies in discerning between a superficial understanding of safety rules and a proactive, risk-mitigating mindset that is crucial for preventing accidents and misuse. Careful judgment is required to identify the approach that most effectively prioritizes safety and legal compliance in a real-world context. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of potential risks associated with firearm ownership and storage, coupled with the implementation of multiple layers of preventative measures. This approach recognizes that a single safety rule, while important, is insufficient. It necessitates considering the environment in which the firearm will be kept, the presence of individuals who may be at risk, e.g., children, individuals with mental health issues, and the potential for unauthorized access or theft. Implementing a robust storage solution, such as a locked safe, combined with strict adherence to safe handling practices and ongoing education, forms a holistic risk management strategy. This aligns with the spirit of Connecticut's laws, which aim to ensure that permit holders are responsible individuals who will not endanger themselves or others. The emphasis is on proactive prevention and minimizing the likelihood of any adverse event. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on basic firearm handling safety rules without addressing the broader context of storage and potential environmental risks. While knowing how to safely handle a firearm is fundamental, it does not encompass the full scope of responsible ownership required by a permit holder. This approach fails to consider the risks of unauthorized access or theft when the firearm is not under direct supervision. Another incorrect approach might emphasize only the legal requirements for permit acquisition, such as passing a background check and completing a basic safety course, without demonstrating a commitment to ongoing risk assessment and mitigation in daily life. This overlooks the dynamic nature of risk and the continuous responsibility of a permit holder. A third incorrect approach could prioritize convenience over security, such as storing a firearm in a readily accessible location for quick defense, but without adequate safeguards against accidental discharge or access by prohibited individuals. This demonstrates a failure to adequately assess and mitigate foreseeable risks, potentially contravening the public safety objectives underlying permit regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a layered approach to risk management. This involves 1. Identifying potential hazards, e.g., unauthorized access, accidental discharge, theft. 2. Assessing the likelihood and severity of these hazards occurring in their specific circumstances. 3. Implementing multiple control measures to reduce these risks to an acceptable level, e.g., secure storage, safe handling practices, awareness of household members' vulnerabilities. 4. Regularly reviewing and updating these measures as circumstances change. This proactive and comprehensive approach ensures the highest level of safety and compliance. Question 5. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must demonstrate a capacity for responsible judgment. When encountering a potentially threatening individual in a public space, what is the most prudent course of action that aligns with the principles of risk assessment and responsible firearm ownership? Option A. Ignore the situation and continue with the original activity, assuming the individual poses no immediate danger. Option B. Assess the immediate environment and the perceived threat, prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance if possible, while maintaining situational awareness and readiness to act only if absolutely necessary and legally justified. Option C. Make assumptions about the individual's intentions based on their appearance and perceived behavior, and react accordingly to preemptively neutralize any perceived threat. Option D. Immediately assume a confrontational stance and prepare to draw the firearm, anticipating a potential threat based on the individual's demeanor. The correct answer is B. Assess the immediate environment and the perceived threat, prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance if possible, while maintaining situational awareness and readiness to act only if absolutely necessary and legally justified. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not just knowledge of firearm laws, but also the ability to apply risk assessment principles to a real-world situation involving potential threats and the responsible handling of a firearm. The challenge lies in balancing the right to self-defense with the paramount duty to ensure public safety and avoid unnecessary escalation or misuse of a firearm. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a genuine, immediate threat and a situation that can be de-escalated or managed through non-violent means. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the immediate environment and the perceived threat, prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance of confrontation if possible, while maintaining situational awareness and readiness to act only if absolutely necessary and legally justified. This approach aligns with Connecticut General Statute Section 29-35, which outlines the conditions under which a permit to carry a pistol or revolver is issued and the responsibilities of the permit holder. The law emphasizes that carrying a pistol or revolver is for the protection of life and property, implying that its use should be a last resort. Ethical considerations also dictate that an individual should not create or invite a confrontation, nor should they use force unless it is reasonably necessary to prevent death or serious physical injury. This approach prioritizes safety and responsible action. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately assuming a confrontational stance and preparing to draw the firearm based on a perceived, but not immediately confirmed, threat. This fails to account for the possibility of misinterpretation or escalation, potentially violating the principle of using force only when reasonably necessary. It bypasses the crucial step of assessing the immediacy and severity of the threat and exploring de-escalation options, which is a cornerstone of responsible firearm handling and self-defense. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely and continue with the original activity without any situational awareness or assessment of potential danger. This demonstrates a lack of responsibility and preparedness, which is contrary to the purpose of obtaining a permit to carry a firearm for self-protection. It neglects the duty to be aware of one's surroundings and to take reasonable steps to ensure personal safety and the safety of others when a potential threat is present. A third incorrect approach involves making assumptions about the individual's intentions based on their appearance or behavior without concrete evidence of a direct threat. This can lead to prejudice and an unwarranted escalation of a situation, which is both ethically unsound and potentially illegal. Connecticut law requires a reasonable belief that force is necessary, not a reaction based on stereotypes or unfounded assumptions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with threat assessment and situational awareness. This involves observing the environment, identifying potential risks, and evaluating the immediacy and severity of any perceived threat. If a threat is identified, the next step is to consider de-escalation strategies and avoidance. Only if these are not feasible or effective, and if there is a reasonable belief that imminent death or serious physical injury is about to occur, should the use of a firearm be considered, strictly in accordance with legal statutes and ethical guidelines. This systematic approach ensures that actions are deliberate, justified, and prioritize safety and legal compliance. Question 6. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk assessment. Which of the following approaches best reflects the comprehensive risk assessment expected of an applicant? Option A. Believing that obtaining a permit is the final step in risk management, with no further personal responsibility for safe handling or storage. Option B. Prioritizing the acquisition of advanced shooting skills and assuming that legal compliance is solely about passing the written test. Option C. Thoroughly evaluating personal circumstances, including emotional stability and home security, and understanding relevant Connecticut general statutes regarding safe firearm practices and potential risks. Option D. Minimizing or omitting any personal history that might be viewed negatively by the issuing authority, regardless of its relevance to responsible firearm ownership. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly evaluating personal circumstances, including emotional stability and home security, and understanding relevant Connecticut general statutes regarding safe firearm practices and potential risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment in the context of firearm ownership and the legal responsibilities associated with it, beyond mere technical proficiency. The applicant must consider potential risks to themselves and others, and how their actions or inactions could lead to dangerous situations, all within the framework of Connecticut law. Careful judgment is required to balance the right to self-defense with the imperative to prevent misuse of a firearm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive self-assessment of personal circumstances and a proactive approach to understanding and mitigating potential risks associated with firearm ownership. This includes honestly evaluating one's emotional stability, any history of substance abuse, and the security of one's home environment. It also necessitates a thorough understanding of Connecticut general statutes concerning the safe storage, transport, and use of firearms, as well as recognizing when professional help might be needed to manage personal risks. This approach aligns with the spirit of Connecticut's permit requirements, which aim to ensure that individuals seeking to carry a firearm are responsible and aware of the potential dangers and their legal obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on the mechanical aspects of firearm handling and marksmanship, neglecting the broader personal and environmental risk factors. This fails to address the underlying principles of responsible gun ownership and the legal duty to prevent harm to oneself and others, which are implicit in the permit application process. Another incorrect approach is to downplay or ignore any personal history that might be perceived as a risk factor, such as past instances of anger management issues or a lack of secure storage solutions. This demonstrates a lack of honesty and self-awareness, which are critical for responsible firearm possession, and directly contravene the intent of risk assessment in the permit process. A further incorrect approach is to assume that simply possessing a permit absolves one of all responsibility for potential misuse or accidents. This overlooks the ongoing legal and ethical obligations to maintain safe practices and to be aware of the potential consequences of negligence, which are fundamental to Connecticut's firearm regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment for firearm ownership by adopting a holistic perspective. This involves a continuous process of self-evaluation, education on legal requirements, and a commitment to safe practices. When faced with personal challenges that could increase risk, seeking appropriate professional guidance, e.g., mental health support, legal counsel, is a sign of responsibility, not weakness. The decision-making framework should prioritize the safety of the community and oneself, ensuring that firearm ownership is undertaken with the utmost seriousness and adherence to all applicable laws and ethical considerations. Question: System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk assessment. Which of the following approaches best reflects the comprehensive risk assessment expected of an applicant? Options: A. Thoroughly evaluating personal circumstances, including emotional stability and home security, and understanding relevant Connecticut general statutes regarding safe firearm practices and potential risks. B. Prioritizing the acquisition of advanced shooting skills and assuming that legal compliance is solely about passing the written test. C. Minimizing or omitting any personal history that might be viewed negatively by the issuing authority, regardless of its relevance to responsible firearm ownership. D. Believing that obtaining a permit is the final step in risk management, with no further personal responsibility for safe handling or storage. Question 7. System analysis indicates that when evaluating an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver, a crucial aspect of the risk assessment involves discerning relevant disqualifying factors. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the legal framework for assessing an applicant's suitability? Option A. A thorough review of the applicant's history for any documented instances or patterns of behavior that Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28 and related regulations define as disqualifying, such as criminal convictions, documented domestic violence, or involuntary mental health commitments. Option B. giving significant weight to unsubstantiated rumors and hearsay regarding the applicant's temperament or past disputes, even if these have not resulted in any legal action or official documentation. Option C. Prioritizing the applicant's current employment status and general financial stability as primary indicators of potential risk, as financial hardship can often lead to unpredictable behavior. Option D. Denying the application based on the applicant's association with individuals who have a criminal record, irrespective of the applicant's own history or involvement in any illegal activities. The correct answer is A. A thorough review of the applicant's history for any documented instances or patterns of behavior that Connecticut General Statutes Section 29-28 and related regulations define as disqualifying, such as criminal convictions, documented domestic violence, or involuntary mental health commitments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk assessment in the context of firearm ownership and permit eligibility, going beyond rote memorization of laws. The challenge lies in applying general risk assessment principles to specific Connecticut statutes and regulations governing permit issuance, particularly concerning factors that might indicate a propensity for violence or a danger to self or others. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between information that is merely suggestive of risk and information that, under Connecticut law, mandates denial or raises serious concerns for the issuing authority. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's history, specifically looking for any documented instances or patterns of behavior that Connecticut General Statutes Section 29-28 and related regulations define as disqualifying. This includes, but is not limited to, convictions for certain crimes, documented history of domestic violence, involuntary commitment for mental health reasons, or credible evidence of a propensity for violence. The focus must be on objective, verifiable information that directly relates to the criteria established by Connecticut law for permit issuance or denial. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the legal framework established by the state, ensuring that decisions are based on established legal standards rather than subjective interpretations or irrelevant personal information. It prioritizes public safety by systematically evaluating the applicant against the specific disqualifiers outlined in the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the applicant's current employment status and general financial stability without correlating this information to specific disqualifying factors under Connecticut law. While financial distress can sometimes be a contributing factor to stress, it is not, in itself, a direct legal disqualifier for a permit to carry a pistol or revolver in Connecticut, unless it leads to specific behaviors or conditions that are legally defined as disqualifying. This approach fails because it relies on a generalized assessment of risk rather than the specific legal criteria mandated by the state. Another incorrect approach would be to give significant weight to unsubstantiated rumors or hearsay regarding the applicant's temperament or past disputes that have not resulted in any legal action or official documentation. Connecticut law requires a basis in fact and legal precedent for denying a permit. Relying on gossip or unverified claims introduces subjectivity and can lead to arbitrary decisions, violating the principles of due process and fair application of the law. This approach is flawed because it lacks the objective evidence required by statute. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the application based on the applicant's association with individuals who have a criminal record, without any evidence that the applicant themselves has engaged in or is likely to engage in illegal activity. Connecticut law focuses on the applicant's individual qualifications and history, not on the character of their acquaintances, unless those associations directly facilitate or involve the applicant in criminal conduct. This approach is incorrect as it penalizes association rather than individual culpability, which is not a basis for permit denial under Connecticut statutes. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with reviewing permit applications should employ a structured risk assessment process that is grounded in the specific legal requirements of Connecticut. This involves 1. Understanding the explicit disqualifying factors outlined in Connecticut General Statutes Section 29-28 and related administrative regulations. 2. prioritizing the collection and evaluation of objective, verifiable evidence that directly addresses these legal criteria. 3. Distinguishing between information that is legally relevant and that which is not. 4. Applying a consistent and fair standard to all applicants, ensuring that decisions are defensible under the law and contribute to public safety without infringing on individual rights. Question 8. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of risk assessment related to firearm possession. Which of the following approaches best reflects this requirement? Option A. Prioritizing a thorough understanding of Connecticut general statutes governing firearm permits and safe storage, coupled with a proactive commitment to minimizing risks through responsible handling and secure storage practices, even beyond minimum legal mandates. Option B. Focusing exclusively on the explicit prohibitions outlined in Connecticut law, assuming any action not specifically forbidden is permissible for permit holders. Option C. Relying on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding the interpretation of carrying laws and safe storage practices. Option D. Interpreting legal requirements for firearm accessibility in a manner that prioritizes personal convenience over potential security risks. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing a thorough understanding of Connecticut general statutes governing firearm permits and safe storage, coupled with a proactive commitment to minimizing risks through responsible handling and secure storage practices, even beyond minimum legal mandates. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of firearm safety and Connecticut law, but also the ability to critically assess potential risks associated with firearm ownership and carry. The challenge lies in distinguishing between legally permissible actions and those that could lead to unsafe situations or legal repercussions, even if not explicitly prohibited by statute. A nuanced understanding of responsible gun ownership and the spirit of the law is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a thorough understanding of Connecticut general statutes, specifically those pertaining to the permit to carry a pistol or revolver, and a proactive commitment to safe storage and responsible handling. This includes recognizing that, while the law may permit certain actions, ethical considerations and risk mitigation are crucial. For instance, understanding the nuances of reasonable belief for carrying a firearm and the importance of secure storage when not in immediate possession are key. This approach prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and responsible gun ownership, aligning with the intent of the permitting process to ensure individuals are fit to carry. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the minimum legal requirements without considering broader safety implications. For example, interpreting the law as allowing a firearm to be left unsecured in a vehicle, as long as it is not readily accessible, without further consideration for potential theft or unauthorized access, demonstrates a failure to engage in comprehensive risk assessment. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any action not explicitly forbidden by statute is permissible, neglecting the ethical responsibilities that accompany the privilege of carrying a firearm. This can lead to situations where an individual might be legally compliant in a narrow sense, but still acting in a manner that is unsafe or could be perceived as reckless. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal advice or personal interpretation rather than a clear understanding of statutory language and established safety practices is also flawed, as it lacks a solid foundation in legal and safety principles. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by first thoroughly studying the relevant Connecticut general statutes, e.g., CGS Section 29-28, CGS Section 29-35, CGS Section 53, A217, and any accompanying guidance from the Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. They should then engage in a self-assessment of their understanding of safe firearm handling, storage, and the legal justifications for carrying a firearm. This involves considering potential scenarios and evaluating them against both the letter and the spirit of the law, prioritizing safety and responsible conduct above all else. Question. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of risk assessment related to firearm possession. Which of the following approaches best reflects this requirement? Options. A. prioritizing a thorough understanding of Connecticut general statutes governing firearm permits and safe storage, coupled with a proactive commitment to minimizing risks through responsible handling and secure storage practices, even beyond minimum legal mandates. B. Focusing exclusively on the explicit prohibitions outlined in Connecticut law, assuming any action not specifically forbidden is permissible for permit holders. C. Relying on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding the interpretation of carrying laws and safe storage practices. D. Interpreting legal requirements for firearm accessibility in a manner that prioritizes personal convenience over potential security risks. Question 9. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must demonstrate a responsible approach to firearm ownership. Considering the principles of risk assessment, which of the following best reflects a prudent and legally compliant approach for an applicant to take during the application process? Option A. Honestly evaluate personal circumstances, including mental and emotional well-being, and proactively understand legal restrictions and responsibilities related to carrying a firearm in Connecticut. Option B. Focus exclusively on meeting the explicit statutory requirements for permit issuance without considering personal risk factors or the broader implications of carrying a firearm. Option C. Rely on informal advice from friends or online forums to interpret legal requirements and assess personal risk, assuming these sources accurately reflect Connecticut law. Option D. Minimize or disregard any personal stressors or emotional challenges experienced recently, as these are not explicitly listed as disqualifiers in the permit application. Correct answer is A. Honestly evaluate personal circumstances, including mental and emotional well-being, and proactively understand legal restrictions and responsibilities related to carrying a firearm in Connecticut. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of Connecticut's firearm laws, but also the ability to critically assess potential risks associated with firearm ownership and carry. The challenge lies in distinguishing between legally permissible actions and those that, while not explicitly prohibited, could increase the risk of misuse or violate the spirit of responsible gun ownership, which is implicitly part of the permit application process. A nuanced understanding of risk assessment is crucial for ensuring public safety and upholding the integrity of the permitting system. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a thorough self-assessment of personal circumstances and a proactive understanding of the legal and ethical responsibilities associated with carrying a firearm. This includes honestly evaluating one's mental and emotional state, considering any personal history that might indicate a heightened risk, and understanding the legal restrictions on carrying in specific locations. This approach aligns with the Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protections, DESP, intent to grant permits to individuals who are responsible and pose no undue risk to themselves or others. It reflects a commitment to safety and adherence to the legal framework governing firearm permits, which prioritizes responsible ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on meeting the minimum legal requirements without considering broader safety implications. This might involve assuming that if an action is not explicitly forbidden by statute, it is acceptable, without engaging in a personal risk assessment. This fails to acknowledge the underlying principle of responsible gun ownership that informs the permitting process. Another incorrect approach is to downplay or ignore personal factors that could be relevant to risk assessment, such as recent significant stressors or emotional difficulties. This demonstrates a lack of self-awareness and a failure to proactively address potential issues that could impact safe firearm handling and carrying. Finally, an approach that relies on hearsay or informal advice from others regarding legal interpretations or risk factors, rather than consulting official sources or understanding the law directly, is also flawed. This can lead to misinterpretations of legal requirements and an inaccurate assessment of personal risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this context should adopt a framework that prioritizes a comprehensive and honest self-evaluation. This involves understanding the specific statutes and regulations governing pistol permits in Connecticut, such as Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28 and Section 29-36F, and applying them to one's personal situation. It requires a proactive approach to identifying and mitigating potential risks, demonstrating a commitment to public safety and responsible firearm ownership. This includes consulting official desk resources and understanding the criteria for permit issuance and revocation. Question 10. System analysis indicates a Connecticut permit applicant for a pistol or revolver is preparing to declare their intended ammunition possession. They own the following firearms: one semi-automatic pistol with magazines designed to hold 15 rounds each, and one revolver with a cylinder designed to hold 6 rounds. They possess two 15-round magazines for the semi-automatic pistol and one 6-round cylinder for the revolver. Based on Connecticut General Statute Section 53-202A and Section 53-202W, what is the maximum total number of rounds of ammunition this applicant can legally possess for these firearms? Option A, 30 rounds, 15 rounds per magazine x 2 magazines for the semi-automatic pistol. Option B, 26 rounds, 10 rounds for the semi-automatic pistol plus 6 rounds for the revolver. Option C, 16 rounds, 10 rounds for the semi-automatic pistol plus 6 rounds for the revolver, assuming the revolver's cylinder is considered a magazine. Option D, 22 rounds, 10 rounds for the semi-automatic pistol plus 10 rounds for the revolver. The correct answer is B, 26 rounds, 10 rounds for the semi-automatic pistol plus 6 rounds for the revolver. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge by requiring the applicant to accurately calculate the total number of rounds of ammunition they can legally possess based on specific firearm types and magazine capacities, while adhering to Connecticut's strict regulations on large capacity magazines. Misinterpreting these regulations or miscalculating the quantities could lead to an illegal possession charge, jeopardizing their permit application and potentially leading to criminal penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure all calculations are precise and all legal limits are respected. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a meticulous, step-by-step calculation that strictly adheres to Connecticut General Statute Section 53-202A and Section 53-202W. This approach correctly identifies that a large capacity magazine is defined as one that can accept more than 10 rounds. Therefore, for firearms that accept magazines with a capacity exceeding 10 rounds, the applicant can only possess a total of 10 rounds of ammunition for each such firearm. For firearms with standard capacity magazines, 10 rounds or less, the applicant can possess up to 10 rounds per magazine, for a total of 10 rounds per firearm. This method ensures compliance by applying the 10-round limit to all magazines that could hold more than 10 rounds, regardless of whether they are currently loaded to full capacity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply multiplying the number of firearms by the maximum capacity of their largest magazines. This fails to account for the legal definition of a large capacity magazine and the 10-round limit imposed by Connecticut law on such magazines. It would result in an overestimation of legally possessed ammunition. Another incorrect approach is to calculate 10 rounds for each firearm that has a magazine capable of holding more than 10 rounds, and then add the full capacity of any standard capacity magazines. This is incorrect because Connecticut law limits possession to 10 rounds per firearm if that firearm is designed to accept a large capacity magazine, regardless of whether the magazine is currently loaded to its full potential or is a standard capacity magazine. The law focuses on the potential capacity of the firearm and its associated magazines. A further incorrect approach is to sum the total number of rounds that could fit into all magazines, regardless of their individual capacities, and then apply a general 10-round limit to the total. This is flawed because the 10-round limit is specific to large capacity magazines and the number of rounds per firearm, not a blanket limit on total ammunition across all firearms. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic and legally compliant approach. This involves 1. Identifying all firearms intended for possession. 2. For each firearm, determining the maximum capacity of its associated magazines. 3. Applying Connecticut General Statute Section 53-202A and Section 53-202W. If a firearm is designed to accept a magazine with a capacity exceeding 10 rounds, a large capacity magazine, the applicant is legally permitted to possess a maximum of 10 rounds of ammunition for that firearm. B. If a firearm is designed to accept only magazines with a capacity of 10 rounds or less, the applicant is legally permitted to possess a maximum of 10 rounds of ammunition for that firearm. 4. Summing the legally permissible rounds for each firearm to arrive at the total legally possessable ammunition. This methodical process ensures adherence to the spirit and letter of the law, minimizing legal risk. Question 11. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver must conduct a thorough risk assessment. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates a legally compliant and ethically sound risk assessment process for this permit application? Option A. Honestly evaluating one's mental and emotional stability, history of substance abuse, any past instances of domestic violence or threats, and understanding the legal prohibitions against carrying firearms under certain conditions, in direct relation to the criteria outlined in Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28. Option B. Minimizing or omitting any personal history that might be viewed unfavorably, such as past arguments or minor legal issues, believing they are not directly indicative of a propensity for serious violence. Option C. Relying on informal advice from peers and online communities about what information is generally considered acceptable for a permit application, rather than consulting official legal requirements. Option D. Focusing primarily on demonstrating proficiency in firearm handling, marksmanship, and knowledge of safe storage practices, as these are the most critical aspects of responsible gun ownership. The correct answer is A. Honestly evaluating one's mental and emotional stability, history of substance abuse, any past instances of domestic violence or threats, and understanding the legal prohibitions against carrying firearms under certain conditions, in direct relation to the criteria outlined in Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment principles as they apply to firearm ownership and the legal requirements for obtaining a permit in Connecticut. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a responsible, legally compliant approach to risk assessment and approaches that are either insufficient, legally problematic, or ethically questionable, all within the specific framework of Connecticut's permit to carry laws. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the applicant's self-assessment aligns with the state's public safety objectives and legal standards. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive self-assessment that directly addresses the criteria outlined in Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28 and related case law, focusing on factors that could indicate a propensity for violence or a lack of responsible firearm handling. This includes honestly evaluating one's mental and emotional stability, history of substance abuse, any past instances of domestic violence or threats, and understanding the legal prohibitions against carrying firearms under certain conditions, e.g., felony convictions, restraining orders. This approach is correct because it aligns with the statutory intent of the permit process, which is to ensure that only individuals who are not a danger to themselves or others are granted the privilege of carrying a pistol or revolver. It demonstrates a proactive understanding of personal responsibility and a commitment to adhering to the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on the physical aspects of firearm ownership, such as marksmanship or safe storage, without considering personal suitability or legal disqualifications. This fails to address the core risk assessment requirement of the permit process, which is to evaluate the applicant's character and potential for misuse of a firearm. It is a regulatory failure because it ignores the legal and ethical dimensions of responsible gun ownership. Another incorrect approach is to downplay or omit any personal history that might be perceived negatively, such as past instances of anger management issues or minor legal infractions, under the assumption that they are not directly related to violent crime. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Connecticut law requires a thorough assessment of an applicant's background, and any attempt to conceal relevant information can lead to permit denial or revocation. It demonstrates a lack of candor and a disregard for the legal process. A third incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal advice from friends or online forums regarding what constitutes a sufficient risk assessment, rather than consulting the official statutes and guidelines. This is professionally unacceptable because it substitutes unreliable information for legal requirements. It is a regulatory failure as it does not ensure compliance with Connecticut's specific legal framework for permit issuance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment for a Connecticut pistol permit by first thoroughly understanding the relevant statutes, particularly Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28, and any accompanying administrative regulations or judicial interpretations. This involves a process of honest self-reflection regarding one's mental, emotional, and legal history, and how these factors might relate to the safe and responsible handling and carrying of a firearm. The decision-making framework should prioritize legal compliance, public safety, and personal integrity, ensuring that all information provided is accurate and complete, and that the assessment directly addresses the legal criteria for permit eligibility. Question 12. Research into Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver exam reveals that applicants are assessed on their understanding of responsible firearm ownership. Considering the principles of risk assessment, which of the following best demonstrates an applicant's preparedness for the responsibilities associated with carrying a pistol or revolver? Option A. A detailed personal assessment of potential risks associated with firearm ownership, including plans for secure storage, safe handling, and awareness of legal obligations, presented as a proactive safety strategy. Option B. A brief acknowledgement of the need for safe storage without elaborating on specific practices or demonstrating an understanding of broader risk factors. Option C. An assertion that personal risk assessment is unnecessary as long as the applicant has no prior convictions and intends to use the firearm solely for self-defense. Option D. A statement confirming that all required legal documentation has been submitted and that the applicant has no disqualifying criminal history, implying minimal risk. The correct answer is A. A detailed personal assessment of potential risks associated with firearm ownership, including plans for secure storage, safe handling, and awareness of legal obligations, presented as a proactive safety strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk assessment in the context of firearm ownership, specifically concerning the potential for misuse or diversion. The applicant must not only understand the legal requirements for obtaining a permit, but also the underlying principles of responsible gun ownership and public safety. This involves anticipating potential risks and demonstrating a commitment to mitigating them, which goes beyond simply meeting minimum legal standards. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a proactive and comprehensive self-assessment of potential risks associated with firearm ownership, coupled with a clear articulation of how these risks will be managed. This includes considering factors such as secure storage, safe handling practices, and awareness of legal responsibilities. This approach is correct because it aligns with the spirit and intent of Connecticut's firearm permit regulation, which aim to ensure that only individuals who can demonstrate responsible ownership and a low risk of misuse are granted a permit. Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28 et sec., which governs pistol and revolver permits, implicitly requires applicants to show they are not a danger to themselves or others, and a thorough risk assessment demonstrates this understanding. Ethical considerations also demand that applicants demonstrate a commitment to public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on meeting the minimum legal documentation requirements without considering the broader implications of responsible firearm ownership. This fails to demonstrate a proactive understanding of risk mitigation and may suggest a superficial engagement with the responsibilities of permit holders. It overlooks the ethical imperative to prioritize public safety beyond mere legal compliance. Another incorrect approach involves downplaying or ignoring potential risks, assuming that as long as the applicant has no disqualifying criminal record, the risk is negligible. This is a flawed perspective, as it fails to acknowledge that even individuals without prior offenses can pose a risk due to unforeseen circumstances or a lack of proper safety protocols. This approach neglects the preventative aspect of risk assessment, which is crucial for responsible gun ownership. A third incorrect approach might involve expressing a belief that the permit process is merely a bureaucratic hurdle and that personal responsibility for firearm safety is an afterthought. This demonstrates a lack of seriousness about the privilege of carrying a firearm and a disregard for the potential consequences of irresponsible ownership. It directly contradicts the underlying public safety goals of the permitting process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment for firearm permits by adopting a comprehensive and proactive mindset. This involves understanding that the permit is not just a right, but also a significant responsibility. The decision-making process should prioritize identifying potential risks, developing concrete mitigation strategies, and demonstrating a genuine commitment to safe and responsible firearm ownership, aligning with both legal mandates and ethical obligations to public safety. Question 13. Investigation of an applicant for a state permit to carry a pistol or revolver in Connecticut reveals that the applicant has a history of minor traffic violations and has expressed strong personal opinions about self-defense. Based on this information, what is the most appropriate risk assessment approach? Option A. Focus the investigation solely on the applicant's traffic violation record, as this is the only objective data point available. Option B. Conduct a thorough background check, including inquiries into any reported mental health history or criminal convictions, and assess whether the applicant's expressed opinions, when viewed in conjunction with any other relevant information, indicate a propensity for violence or pose a risk to public safety, in accordance with Connecticut general statutes. Option C. Issue the permit immediately, as minor traffic violations and personal opinions on self-defense do not constitute legal grounds for denial under Connecticut law. Option D. Deny the permit based on the applicant's strong personal opinions about self-defense, as this suggests a potentially aggressive mindset. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough background check, including inquiries into any reported mental health history or criminal convictions, and assess whether the applicant's expressed opinions, when viewed in conjunction with any other relevant information, indicate a propensity for violence or pose a risk to public safety, in accordance with Connecticut general statutes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a thorough understanding of Connecticut's specific legal framework for firearm permits, particularly concerning the nuances of risk assessment as mandated by state law. The challenge lies in distinguishing between general safety considerations and the legally defined criteria for permit denial or issuance, ensuring that decisions are based on objective legal standards rather than subjective interpretations or incomplete information. Careful judgment is required to apply these standards accurately to a given applicant's circumstances. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation and a thorough investigation into any information that raises concerns about the applicant's eligibility under Connecticut general statutes. This approach directly aligns with the statutory requirements for permit issuance, which necessitate a determination that the applicant is not disqualified by any of the enumerated grounds. Specifically, Connecticut General Statutes Section 29-28 and Section 29-36F mandate that the issuing authority investigate the applicant's background, including any history of mental health issues, criminal activity, or other factors that would render them a danger to themselves or others. A diligent investigation ensures that the decision is grounded in factual evidence and legal eligibility, thereby upholding public safety and due process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the applicant's self-reported information without independent verification or further inquiry, even when red flags are present. This fails to meet the statutory obligation to investigate and could lead to the issuance of a permit to an individual who poses a risk, violating the public safety mandate of the law. Another incorrect approach is to deny a permit based on unsubstantiated rumors or hearsay without any concrete evidence or legal basis for disqualification. This violates the applicant's due process rights and is not supported by the Connecticut statutes, which require specific grounds for denial. A further incorrect approach is to focus on minor, irrelevant personal details of the applicant that have no bearing on their legal eligibility to possess a firearm. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of the risk assessment criteria and diverts attention from the legally mandated factors that determine permit eligibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with reviewing permit applications should adopt a systematic process. This begins with a meticulous examination of all submitted forms and supporting documents. Any information that appears to contradict statutory eligibility requirements or raises potential safety concerns must trigger a deeper investigation. This investigation should involve consulting relevant databases, contacting references if permitted by law, and potentially seeking additional information from the applicant or other authorities. The decision to issue or deny a permit must be based solely on whether the applicant meets all the legal criteria outlined in Connecticut general statutes and is not disqualified by any of the specified grounds. This ensures fairness to the applicant and protects the public. Question 14. Assessment of an applicant's suitability for a state permit to carry a pistol or revolver in Connecticut requires a thorough risk assessment. Which of the following approaches best reflects the legally mandated and professionally responsible method for evaluating an applicant's risk profile? Option A. A reliance on character references from friends and employers to gauge the applicant's general trustworthiness. Option B. Comprehensive review of all disqualifying factors explicitly outlined in Connecticut general statutes, including mental health history, criminal record, and any history of domestic violence. Option C. An assessment based primarily on the applicant's stated purpose for firearm ownership and their assurances of responsible use. Option D. A determination that a lack of criminal convictions inherently signifies a low-risk applicant, without further investigation into other potential risk factors. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive review of all disqualifying factors explicitly outlined in Connecticut general statutes, including mental health history, criminal record, and any history of domestic violence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of the risk assessment process as it applies to firearm ownership and the legal requirements for obtaining a permit in Connecticut. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a superficial understanding of risk and a comprehensive, legally compliant approach that prioritizes public safety and adherence to statutory requirements. A careful judgment is required to identify the most thorough and legally sound method of assessing risk in this context. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of all disqualifying factors as mandated by Connecticut general statutes, specifically focusing on sections related to mental health, criminal history, and any history of domestic violence. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the statutory framework for permit issuance, which is designed to identify individuals who pose a risk to themselves or others. The law explicitly outlines these disqualifying factors as the primary basis for determining eligibility, ensuring that the risk assessment is grounded in objective legal criteria rather than subjective interpretations. This method prioritizes public safety by systematically excluding individuals who have demonstrated a propensity for violence or pose a significant risk. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves focusing solely on the applicant's stated intent for owning a firearm without a thorough investigation into disqualifying factors. This is professionally unacceptable because it neglects the legal mandate to assess objective risk indicators. Connecticut law does not permit permit issuance based on an applicant's subjective assurances alone. It requires a review of specific disqualifying criteria. Another incorrect approach is to rely primarily on the opinion of a personal acquaintance or employer regarding the applicant's character. While character references can be part of a broader assessment, they are not a substitute for the legally mandated review of disqualifying factors. This approach is ethically and legally flawed because it introduces subjective bias and bypasses the objective, statutory requirements for permit eligibility. The law requires a review of specific legal disqualifiers, not general character assessments. A further incorrect approach is to assume that a clean criminal record automatically equates to a low-risk applicant, without considering other potential disqualifying factors, such as documented instances of violent behavior that may not have resulted in a criminal conviction, or specific mental health considerations that are legally relevant. This is professionally unacceptable, as it fails to conduct a complete risk assessment as defined by Connecticut statutes, which encompass more than just criminal convictions. Professional reasoning. Professionals involved in the permit application process must adopt a systematic decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to statutory requirements. This involves understanding that risk assessment in this context is not a subjective evaluation of general character, but a rigorous application of legal disqualifiers. The process should begin with a thorough review of all legally mandated criteria, such as those pertaining to mental health, criminal history, and domestic violence records. Any information gathered should be evaluated against these specific legal standards. If any disqualifying factor is identified, the application must be denied, regardless of other positive attributes or assurances. This ensures consistency, fairness, and most importantly, public safety in accordance with Connecticut law. Question 15. Implementation of a responsible approach to obtaining a state permit to carry a pistol or revolver in Connecticut requires an applicant to engage in a comprehensive risk assessment. Which of the following best reflects this essential risk assessment process? Option A. Prioritizing the development of advanced marksmanship skills and a detailed knowledge of firearm maintenance, as these are the primary indicators of responsible ownership. Option B. Relying on informal advice from peers and online communities to understand the requirements and potential risks associated with firearm ownership. Option C. Honestly evaluating personal circumstances, including mental and emotional stability, any history of violence or substance abuse, and a thorough understanding of safe firearm storage and handling, alongside a diligent review of all applicable Connecticut general statutes. Option D. Assuming that a lack of any criminal convictions is the sole determinant of an applicant's suitability to carry a firearm. The correct answer is C. Honestly evaluating personal circumstances, including mental and emotional stability, any history of violence or substance abuse, and a thorough understanding of safe firearm storage and handling, alongside a diligent review of all applicable Connecticut general statutes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk assessment in the context of firearm ownership, specifically concerning the potential for misuse and the legal obligations to prevent it. The challenge lies in balancing the right to self-defense with the responsibility to ensure public safety, a core tenet of Connecticut's firearm permitting laws. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks without infringing upon lawful rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive self-assessment of personal circumstances and a thorough understanding of Connecticut general statutes, particularly those pertaining to the lawful possession and use of firearms. This approach requires the applicant to honestly evaluate their own mental and emotional stability, any history of violence or substance abuse, and their knowledge of safe firearm storage and handling practices. It also necessitates a proactive engagement with the legal framework, ensuring they meet all statutory requirements for a permit, which implicitly includes demonstrating that they are not a person who poses a risk to themselves or others. This aligns with the underlying purpose of the permitting process, to ensure that only responsible individuals are granted the privilege of carrying a firearm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves focusing solely on the technical aspects of firearm operation, such as marksmanship or disassembly, while neglecting the personal risk factors and legal responsibilities. This fails to address the fundamental purpose of the permit, which is to assess the applicant's suitability and risk profile, not just their proficiency with a weapon. It overlooks the statutory requirements that prohibit issuance to individuals who may pose a danger. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a clean criminal record automatically equates to suitability for carrying a firearm. While a criminal record is a significant factor, Connecticut law and the spirit of responsible firearm ownership also consider other risk factors, such as documented instances of domestic disputes, mental health crises, or patterns of behavior that suggest a propensity for violence, even if not resulting in a criminal conviction. This approach is insufficient because it does not encompass the full spectrum of risk assessment mandated by the permitting process. A further incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal advice from friends or online forums without verifying the information against official Connecticut statutes and regulations. This can lead to a misunderstanding of legal requirements and a failure to address critical risk factors that are specifically addressed in state law. Such reliance can result in an applicant unknowingly failing to meet the necessary criteria or misinterpreting their own risk profile. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical responsibility, and public safety. This involves a thorough understanding of the relevant statutes, a commitment to honest self-assessment, and a proactive approach to gathering accurate information. When evaluating an applicant's suitability, the focus should always be on whether they meet the legal criteria and demonstrate the responsibility required to carry a firearm safely and lawfully. thereby mitigating potential risks to themselves and the community. Question 16. To address the challenge of responsible firearm ownership and carrying in Connecticut, an applicant for a state permit to carry a pistol or revolver is evaluating their preparedness. Which of the following represents the most prudent and legally sound approach to risk assessment and preparation? Option A. Focus exclusively on memorizing the specific statutes and regulations required for permit application, assuming that meeting these minimum legal criteria is sufficient for responsible firearm ownership. Option B. Minimize or dismiss any personal concerns related to stress, anger management, or substance use, believing that these are only relevant if they constitute a legal disqualification for the permit. Option C. Rely primarily on informal advice and opinions from friends or acquaintances who own firearms, rather than consulting official legal resources or certified training programs. Option D. Honestly assess personal mental and emotional well-being. Thoroughly understand all legal obligations and restrictions for permit holders in Connecticut, and actively seek out advanced training in safe storage, conflict de-escalation, and responsible firearm handling beyond the minimum requirements. Correct answer is D. Honestly assess personal mental and emotional well-being, thoroughly understand all legal obligations and restrictions for permit holders in Connecticut, and actively seek out advanced training in safe storage, conflict de-escalation, and responsible firearm handling beyond the minimum requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not just knowledge of firearm safety and legal requirements, but also the ability to critically assess and mitigate potential risks associated with firearm ownership and use. The challenge lies in moving beyond rote memorization of statutes to applying those principles in a proactive and responsible manner, anticipating potential issues before they arise. This requires a nuanced understanding of Connecticut's legal framework for permit issuance and a commitment to responsible gun ownership principles. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive self-assessment of personal circumstances and a proactive engagement with resources that can inform risk mitigation. This includes honestly evaluating one's mental and emotional state, understanding the legal responsibilities of permit holders, and seeking out training that goes beyond basic proficiency to cover safe storage, conflict de-escalation, and responsible handling in various scenarios. This approach aligns with the spirit of Connecticut's permit to carry laws, which aim to ensure that individuals seeking to carry firearms are not only legally qualified, but also demonstrate a commitment to public safety and responsible behavior. The emphasis on understanding legal obligations and seeking advanced training directly addresses the state's interest in preventing misuse of firearms and promoting safe practices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on meeting the minimum legal requirements without considering broader safety implications. This might involve only learning the specific statutes required for the permit application and assuming that legal compliance is the sole determinant of responsible firearm ownership. This fails to address the inherent risks associated with firearms and neglects the ethical responsibility to minimize those risks through diligent preparation and ongoing education. It overlooks the fact that a permit is a privilege, not an absolute right, and carries with it a significant duty of care. Another incorrect approach involves downplaying or ignoring personal factors that could potentially impact safe firearm handling. This might include dismissing concerns about stress, anger management, or substance use, and believing that as long as these issues do not legally disqualify an applicant, they are irrelevant to responsible permit holding. This approach is ethically flawed and potentially dangerous, as it fails to acknowledge that even without a formal disqualification, personal well-being is intrinsically linked to safe firearm practices. Connecticut law, while specific in its disqualifiers, implicitly expects permit holders to exercise sound judgment and self-awareness. A third incorrect approach might be to rely on anecdotal advice or informal opinions from other gun owners rather than seeking authoritative information. This could lead to a misunderstanding of legal requirements, safe storage practices, or the nuances of responsible carrying. It bypasses the structured learning and objective information provided by certified instructors and official legal resources, which are designed to ensure a consistent and accurate understanding of the responsibilities associated with carrying a firearm. This reliance on informal sources can perpetuate misinformation and undermine the safety standards Connecticut aims to uphold. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a holistic understanding of responsibility. This involves first thoroughly understanding all applicable laws and regulations. Second, it requires a candid self-assessment of personal suitability, considering not just legal disqualifiers, but also factors that contribute to safe and responsible behavior. Third, it necessitates seeking out comprehensive training that covers not only the mechanics of firearm use, but also safe storage, legal responsibilities, and conflict avoidance. Finally, it involves a commitment to ongoing learning and adherence to the highest ethical standards of firearm ownership and carrying. Question 17. The review process indicates a need to assess the risk associated with an applicant seeking a state permit to carry a pistol or revolver in Connecticut. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the legal and ethical requirements for conducting such a risk assessment under Connecticut law? Option A. Base the risk assessment on the applicant's perceived demeanor during the application process and any subjective concerns about their lifestyle, even if no specific statutory disqualifiers are identified. Option B. Rely primarily on the applicant's personal narrative and character references provided in their application, assuming these accurately reflect their suitability for carrying a firearm. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation and legally permissible background checks to identify any disqualifying factors as defined by Connecticut general statutes, ensuring the assessment is objective and based solely on statutory criteria. Option D. Initiate an extensive personal investigation into the applicant's social media activity and private life, looking for any potential indicators of risk, regardless of their direct relevance to statutory disqualifiers. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation and legally permissible background checks to identify any disqualifying factors as defined by Connecticut general statutes, ensuring the assessment is objective and based solely on statutory criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate an understanding of the risk assessment process as it applies to firearm permit applications in Connecticut. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a superficial review and a thorough, legally compliant risk assessment that considers all relevant factors without overstepping legal boundaries or introducing bias. Careful judgment is required to ensure the assessment is objective, evidence-based, and adheres strictly to Connecticut general statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's provided documentation and any legally permissible background checks to identify any disqualifying factors as defined by Connecticut law. This includes verifying the applicant's eligibility, checking for any prohibiting criminal history, mental health adjudications, or documented instances of domestic violence, all of which are explicitly outlined in Connecticut general statutes concerning firearm permits. The assessment must be objective and based solely on statutory criteria, avoiding subjective interpretations or assumptions about the applicant's character or future behavior beyond what is legally mandated. This approach ensures compliance with the spirit and letter of Connecticut's firearm permitting laws, prioritizing public safety while respecting individual rights within the legal framework. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the applicant's personal statement and references without conducting any independent verification or background checks. This fails to meet the statutory requirement for a thorough review and could overlook critical disqualifying information that would be revealed through legally authorized checks. It introduces an unacceptable level of risk by accepting information at face value without due diligence. Another incorrect approach is to conduct an overly broad or intrusive background investigation that extends beyond the scope permitted by Connecticut law for a pistol permit application. This might involve investigating aspects of the applicant's life that are not relevant to firearm eligibility under state statutes, potentially violating privacy rights and exceeding the authority granted to the reviewing body. Such an approach is not only legally questionable, but also ethically problematic. A further incorrect approach is to make a determination based on personal biases or stereotypes about the applicant's background, appearance, or perceived lifestyle, rather than on objective, legally defined criteria. This introduces an element of prejudice into the risk assessment, which is antithetical to fair and lawful administrative processes and directly violates the principles of equal treatment under the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals involved in reviewing firearm permit applications must adopt a systematic and legally grounded approach. This involves understanding the specific disqualifying criteria established by Connecticut general statutes, such as those found in sections related to criminal convictions, mental health commitments, and domestic violence restraining orders. The process should be guided by a policy of objective evidence gathering and assessment, ensuring that all decisions are defensible under the law. When in doubt about the interpretation of a statute or the relevance of a piece of information, seeking guidance from legal counsel or supervisory authorities is paramount to maintaining professional integrity and legal compliance. Question 18. Examination of the data shows an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver is evaluating their approach to risk assessment regarding firearm ownership. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates a comprehensive understanding of responsible risk mitigation in this context? Option A. Focusing solely on meeting the minimum legal requirements for permit application and obtaining the permit. Option B. Assuming that since they have no prior criminal record or history of firearm misuse, their risk assessment is complete. Option C. Actively seeking comprehensive firearm safety training, understanding all relevant Connecticut statutes on safe storage and carry, and implementing secure storage solutions beyond minimum legal requirements. Option D. Believing that as a law-abiding citizen, the inherent risks associated with firearm ownership are negligible. The correct answer is C. Actively seeking comprehensive firearm safety training, understanding all relevant Connecticut statutes on safe storage and carry, and implementing secure storage solutions beyond minimum legal requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant for a Connecticut state permit to carry a pistol or revolver to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment in the context of firearm ownership and responsible handling. The challenge lies in distinguishing between proactive safety measures and reactive, potentially insufficient, or even counterproductive actions. Careful judgment is required to identify the most effective and legally compliant approach to mitigating risks associated with firearm possession. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive and proactive approach to risk assessment that prioritizes education, secure storage, and adherence to all legal requirements. This includes understanding the legal framework for firearm ownership in Connecticut, such as the permit application process and safe storage mandates, and actively seeking training on safe handling and storage. This approach is correct because it aligns with the spirit and letter of Connecticut law, which emphasizes responsible gun ownership and the prevention of unauthorized access or misuse. It demonstrates a commitment to minimizing the likelihood of accidents, theft, or intentional misuse by taking all reasonable precautions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the absence of prior incidents as a sufficient risk assessment. This is professionally unacceptable because it is a reactive rather than proactive stance. Connecticut law and responsible gun ownership principles necessitate anticipating potential risks, not merely reacting to them after an incident has occurred. The absence of past problems does not guarantee future safety. Another incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the legal requirements for permit acquisition without considering broader safety practices. While meeting legal criteria is essential, it is not exhaustive of responsible risk assessment. This approach fails to address the practical aspects of safe storage and handling that are crucial for preventing accidents and unauthorized access, which are implicit in the broader goal of public safety and responsible firearm ownership. A further incorrect approach is to believe that owning a firearm inherently poses no significant risk if the owner is law-abiding. This is professionally unacceptable as it demonstrates a lack of understanding of the inherent risks associated with any firearm, regardless of the owner's intentions or legal standing. Firearms are tools that require constant vigilance and adherence to safety protocols to prevent unintended consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable state and local laws regarding firearm ownership and carry. This should be followed by an assessment of personal circumstances and potential risks, leading to the implementation of robust safety measures. This includes seeking appropriate training ensuring secure storage solutions that comply with Connecticut statutes, and maintaining a continuous awareness of safe firearm practices. The goal is always to mitigate risk through proactive and comprehensive measures, rather than relying on the absence of past issues or minimal legal compliance. Question 19. Upon reviewing an applicant's request for a state permit to carry a pistol or revolver, which approach to risk assessment best demonstrates a responsible and legally compliant understanding of the requirements for obtaining such a permit in Connecticut? Option A. Evaluating personal safety risks based on specific, articulable threats or circumstances that create a demonstrable need for self-protection, and explaining how carrying a firearm would mitigate these identified risks lawfully and responsibly. Option B. Basing the assessment on assumptions about the safety of certain areas or the perceived threat posed by specific demographics, without direct personal experience or objective evidence of danger. Option C. Relying on a general feeling of unease about crime in the community and a desire to be prepared for any potential threat, without specific incidents or documented dangers. Option D. Prioritizing the convenience of carrying a firearm for everyday activities and potential, but not specific, future encounters, over a detailed analysis of personal risk. The correct answer is A. Evaluating personal safety risks based on specific, articulable threats or circumstances that create a demonstrable need for self-protection, and explaining how carrying a firearm would mitigate these identified risks lawfully and responsibly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk assessment beyond mere identification of potential threats. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a proactive, responsible approach to personal safety and an overly cautious or potentially discriminatory one, all within the legal framework of Connecticut's permit to carry laws. Careful judgment is required to ensure the applicant's reasoning aligns with the principles of responsible firearm ownership and the legal requirements for obtaining a permit. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of personal safety risks that is grounded in objective factors and a clear, demonstrable need for self-protection. This approach prioritizes understanding the applicant's specific circumstances, such as documented threats, high-risk occupation, or living in an area with demonstrably high crime rates affecting personal safety. It requires the applicant to articulate how carrying a firearm would mitigate these specific, identified risks in a lawful and responsible manner, aligning with the spirit and letter of Connecticut general statutes concerning permits to carry. This demonstrates a mature understanding of the responsibilities associated with firearm ownership and the legal justifications for carrying a weapon. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves focusing solely on a generalized fear of crime or a desire for self-defense without specific, articulable threats or circumstances. This approach fails to demonstrate a concrete, assessed risk that necessitates carrying a firearm under Connecticut law, which often requires a showing of reasonable apprehension of danger. Another incorrect approach is to base the risk assessment on speculative or discriminatory factors, such as assumptions about certain neighborhoods or individuals without objective evidence of personal threat. This not only demonstrates poor judgment, but can also lead to actions that are inconsistent with legal requirements and ethical considerations for responsible firearm ownership. A further incorrect approach is to prioritize the convenience of carrying a firearm for any situation over a thorough risk assessment. This suggests a casual or irresponsible attitude towards firearm possession, failing to acknowledge the significant legal and ethical responsibilities involved and the specific criteria for permit issuance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment for permit applications by first understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, Connecticut in this case. They should then gather objective information about the applicant's circumstances, focusing on credible threats or demonstrable needs for self-protection. The decision-making process should involve evaluating whether the proposed action, carrying a firearm, is a proportionate and lawful response to the identified risks, always prioritizing safety, legality, and ethical responsibility. Question 20. The audit findings indicate a potential underestimation of the average duration individuals spend at licensed shooting ranges, based on the following recorded times in minutes: 45, 60, 75, 50, 65, 90, 55, 70, 80, 60. Calculate the average time spent at the range using the most statistically appropriate method for this data set to address the audit finding. Option A. Estimate the average time based on general observation. Option B. Average the minimum and maximum recorded times. Option C. Calculate the arithmetic mean of the recorded times. Option D. Calculate the median time without sorting the data. The correct answer is C. Calculate the arithmetic mean of the recorded times. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential discrepancy in the calculation of the average time a permit holder spends at a licensed shooting range, which is a factor in determining the effectiveness of certain safety training programs. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires not only an understanding of the Connecticut general statutes concerning firearm permits, but also the ability to accurately interpret and apply statistical data to regulatory compliance. Misinterpreting the data or applying incorrect statistical methods could lead to flawed conclusions about training efficacy, potentially impacting future safety recommendations, or even the validity of permit renewals if the data were used in a broader risk assessment context. The best approach involves a precise calculation of the average time spent at the range using the provided data. This method is correct because it directly addresses the audit finding by performing the requested calculation based on the raw data. The Connecticut general statutes, while not explicitly detailing statistical calculation methods for range time, emphasize the importance of accurate record keeping and the responsible assessment of factors contributing to safe firearm handling. By calculating the arithmetic mean, we are adhering to standard statistical practices for determining central tendency, which is the most direct and unbiased way to represent the average of the given data points. This ensures that the audit finding is addressed with factual, data-driven evidence. The formula for the arithmetic mean is \text average time equals \frac sum I equals 1 where \ti represents the time spent at the range for each individual, and \n is the total number of individuals. An incorrect approach would be to simply average the minimum and maximum times recorded. This is professionally unacceptable because it ignores the distribution of the data and relies on extreme values, which are not representative of the typical experience. This method fails to account for the majority of data points and can lead to a significantly skewed and inaccurate average, violating the principle of accurate data representation required for any meaningful assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate the median time spent at the range without first sorting the data. This is professionally unacceptable because the median, by definition, requires the data to be ordered from least to greatest. Calculating the median from unsorted data will yield an incorrect middle value, rendering the result meaningless and failing to accurately represent the central tendency of the range times. A further incorrect approach would be to estimate the average time based on anecdotal evidence or a general impression of how long people typically spend at the range. This is professionally unacceptable as it completely disregards the quantitative data provided by the audit. Regulatory compliance and risk assessment must be based on objective, verifiable data, not subjective opinions or estimations, which are prone to bias and inaccuracy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Clearly understanding the specific regulatory requirement or audit finding. 2. Identifying the relevant data available. 3. Selecting the appropriate statistical method to analyze the data in relation to the finding. 4. Performing the calculation accurately. 5. Interpreting the results in the context of the regulatory framework and ethical obligations for safety and compliance.